You're all about staying ahead of the curve. And this deep dive, well, let's just say it's right up your alley. We're diving into this whole thing with the Biden administration, about the proposed ban on new vehicles using Chinese or Russian software and hardware.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about like swapping out the radio here. This could completely change the game for the U.S. car market. It could even change how we think about cars, period.
We've got a whole bunch of articles here that really break it all down, the cybersecurity worries, what it could mean for people who drive, the whole nine yards.
It's pretty fascinating stuff, honestly. A little unnerving, too, when you see how tech, global politics, and just like our daily lives are all getting tangled up.
Okay, so the headlines, they don't hold back, do they? It sounds pretty serious. The U.S. Commerce Department basically hitting the brakes on selling new vehicles in the U.S. if there's even a whiff of Chinese or Russian software or hardware in them. And then they drop the national security risks, which always kicks things up a notch.
Right, right. It's key to understand what they mean by that, though. There are two big concerns behind this whole proposed ban. So first up, data security. Think about it, today's cars are like data collecting machines. Your location, how you drive, heck, even what you're listening to on Spotify. The U.S. government, they're worried about all that data ending up in the wrong hands, flowing back to China or Russia, and who knows what they could do with it.
So it's not just about them knowing where I'm driving, but like what I'm doing in my car. That's a bit creepy, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's a bit unsettling. And then there's the second concern, remote sabotage. That's when things get really interesting or scary, depending on how you look at it.
Wait, you mean like someone hacking into a car's system from like across the world? Is this a movie plot or real life?
It's a real concern. Officials are worried that China or Russia could find a way to remotely access and control vehicles using their technology. Imagine the chaos causing accidents, messing with entire transportation systems. It's not out of the realm of possibility.
Okay, that's pretty chilling. But has anything like that actually happened, in the real world? Or is this all hypothetical?
Well, there haven't been any huge confirmed attacks that we know of, but there have been some smaller incidents and research that shows just how vulnerable these vehicle systems can be. And remember what happened with Kaspersky antivirus.
Oh, right. That was software from a company based in Moscow. And the US government had the same worries about foreign governments getting their hands on sensitive data. So are they kind of drawing a line in the sand now with car technology?
In a way, yeah, I think you could say that. And it's important to remember this isn't happening in a bubble. China and Russia, they've got their own rules going on. They require businesses within their borders to use only domestically produced software. They've basically shut out U.S. tech companies like Google and Microsoft from the get-go.
So there's already this whole tech rivalry simmering beneath the surface.
Absolutely. This proposed ban, it's kind of a reaction to those policies they already have in place. And it's a way for the U.S. to protect its own interests in this whole tech game, especially as things change so quickly.
Especially since China has been putting a ton of resources into connected cars, and their vehicles are becoming more and more popular around the world.
Exactly. The U.S. is trying to get ahead of any potential problems before Chinese cars become more common here. It's all part of a much bigger game.
So it's like this whole global tech chess match, and we're all kind of caught in the middle. But let's bring it back down to earth for a second. Let's say I'm thinking about buying a new car in the next few years. What does this ban actually mean for me?
Well, it's not like every car with even a tiny bit of Chinese or Russian tech is going to be like banned from existence. There's been some talk about possible loopholes or exemptions, especially for companies that can show they're doing their due diligence, taking steps to address the risks.
Okay, so maybe a European car company that uses a few Chinese parts might still be okay.
Yeah, maybe. But it gets kind of complicated. They haven't really spelled out exactly what those exemptions would look like, so it's a bit of a waiting game. And, of course, even if a company does get an exemption, they're going to be under a microscope facing a ton of scrutiny and security checks.
Yeah, that makes sense. But all this talk about exemptions and loopholes and whatnot, it makes it sound like actually enforcing this ban is going to be a nightmare. I mean, how are they going to keep track of every single bit of software and hardware in a modern car and where it came from?
That's where the software bill of materials comes in, or SBOM for short. Think of it like a super detailed ingredient list for all the software running in a vehicle.
So instead of listing like flour and sugar, it's lines of code and algorithms and stuff like that.
Exactly. Every single component, where it came from, everything's laid out. That way, regulators can trace back the origins of the software and see if anything sets off any alarm bells.
And we're not just talking about the software that runs like the entertainment system, right?
Oh, no, not even close. It's everything. It's the software embedded in the hardware, the car's computer systems, the sensors, you name it. Even something as basic as Bluetooth connectivity that relies on software that could fall under this ban.
Wow, I honestly had no idea. It's like this whole hidden world of software in our cars that we never even think about.
Okay, so let's say they find something on that SBM, something made in China or Russia. What happens then? That's where things get really interesting and, to be honest, a little unclear. In theory, the Commerce Department could just block that vehicle from being imported or sold here. Or they could demand that the software be removed or replaced, which logistically could be a huge mess for manufacturers.
And probably add a nice chunk of change to the price tag, which means we, the people buying the cars, would end up paying the difference.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility, and it really highlights the economic ripple effects this ban could have. I mean, this could be huge, both for the auto industry and for consumers. We could see delays in new models being released, limited features, and yeah, probably higher prices across the board.
So it's not just about who builds our cars, but how they're built, what's inside them. This whole thing feels like we're on the verge of a whole new era for the car market.
I think you're right, and it raises these really big questions about the future of driving, of mobility. I mean, as cars rely more and more on software, on being connected, are we okay with governments deciding what tech is allowed inside them?
That's a tough one. On one hand, I get it, right? Governments need to think about national security protecting our data. But on the other hand, is a ban really the best way to go about it? Is that the only option?
It's definitely not a simple issue. There's no easy answer. And it shows you how technological innovation and geopolitics are on a collision course more and more these days.
It's like we're on this, I don't know, like a runaway train of technology, and we don't even know where the tracks are going.
And we're all trying to figure out, like, who's got their hand on the emergency brake? But okay, let's bring it back down to earth again. Imagine this. You'll walk into a dealership, right? Maybe a few years from now. And that car you've had your eye on, it's missing some of the features you're really excited about.
Oh, you mean because those features use tech that got caught in the crosshairs of this ban? Like no more self-parking because the sensors are suddenly a security risk?
Yeah, maybe not quite that extreme, but it's definitely a possibility. Automakers might have to make some tough calls about which features to keep, which ones to drop, to avoid running into trouble with the regulations.
Where those features, they become like this luxury extra, that only people with a ton of money can afford.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, when manufacturers have to pay more, guess who ends up footing the bill? The consumer. So yeah, this ban, it could really change who can afford new vehicles, especially the ones with all the bells and whistles.
It makes you wonder if this whole push for security, with the best intentions and all, could end up kind of backfiring. Like, what if it actually slows down innovation or even pushes people toward buying older, less safe cars because they just can't swing the cost of the newer models?
Those are really important points.
Mhm.
And it just goes to show with these big, complex issues, there are always trade-offs. There's never going to be one perfect answer that solves everything.
It's like we're trying to put together a puzzle, but the pieces keep changing shape right in front of our eyes.
That's a great way to put it. And that's exactly why it's so important to stay informed, to really understand what these decisions could mean down the road.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to chew on. It's one thing to see the headlines, but it's another thing entirely to really get into the nitty-gritty and think about the potential consequences.
Absolutely. And that's what we've tried to do today, give you the information, the insights you need to form your own opinions, and make informed decisions.
So as we try to navigate this increasingly wild world of tech, geopolitics, and yeah, even something as everyday as cars, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners walk away with?
I'd say it's this. Never stop asking questions. Stay curious. And don't be afraid to dig deeper, to challenge what you hear, and demand clarity from the people in charge. The future of how we get around, even the future of our world, depends on us being engaged and informed.